It is somewhere in southern Germany, in the last cold weeks of the war, and a young American scout is lying flat in the wet grass at the edge of a farm, watching 50 horses breathe steam into the dark. They are not workhorses. They are thoroughbreds, long-legged, fine-blooded animals, the personal mounts of senior SS officers who are asleep 100 yards away in a requisitioned farmhouse. At first light, the Americans are going to hit that farmhouse. The scout has asked his commanding officer for one favor before they do. 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes before the shooting starts. He wants the horses. His name is Joe Medicine Crow. He is a Crow Indian from Montana, and underneath his U.S. Army uniform, painted on both arms, are 2 red stripes. Tucked inside his steel helmet is a single eagle feather, painted yellow, given to him by a medicine man before he shipped overseas to keep him from harm. By his orders, he is a forward scout for the 103rd Infantry Division. By blood, he is something much older than that. And in the next 5 minutes, he is going to do something no man of his nation has managed to do in more than half a century. In the gray before dawn, he slips past the sleeping guards with nothing on him but a coil of rope and a Colt 45. He moves into the corral and he chooses, the way his grandfathers chose, the finest animal in the herd. He knots the rope into a bridle, the old way, and swings up onto the horse's bare back. Then Joe Medicine Crow opens his mouth and lets a crow war cry tear out into the German night. The herd breaks. 50 horses pour through the open gate and spill out across the countryside, and the young scout rides in the middle of the stampede, driving them forward, and behind him, the farmhouse comes apart. Officers stumbling out into the dark in their underwear, firing their pistols at the shape thundering away from them. And as the bullets chase him across a German field, Joe Medicine Crow is singing, not screaming, singing, a crow song of praise. The song a warrior sings when he has done a great thing, carried 400 years across an ocean and into a war his ancestors could never have dreamed of. He didn't know it yet, but on the bare back of a stolen SS thoroughbred, singing into the dark, Joe Medicine Crow had just become the last war chief of the Plains Indians. To understand what that sentence means, you have to go back, past the war, past the ocean, to a reservation in Montana, and to a path that everyone believed had closed forever. Joseph Medicine Crow was born on October 27, 1913, on the Crow Indian Reservation near Lodge Grass, Montana. In his own language, his name meant high bird. He was raised by the old people of his tribe in the way that Crow warriors had always been raised, taught to ride bareback before he was big enough to do it safely, to swim cold rivers, to run until his lungs burned, to track game, and above all, to master his own fear. His was not an ordinary family. One of his grandfathers, White Man Runs Him, had ridden as a scout for General George Armstrong Custer, and had watched the Battle of the Little Bighorn unfold in 1876. As a boy, Joe heard that story, the most famous battle in the history of the American West, not from a book, but from the lips of a man who had been there to see it. The blood that ran in him was the blood of chiefs, and in the world those chiefs had lived in, there was one summit a Crow man could reach. To become a war chief, he had to accomplish 4 specific deeds in battle. He had to touch a living enemy and come away unharmed, what the Plains tribes called counting coup, the bravest act of all, because it meant closing the distance and choosing not to kill. He had to take a weapon from an enemy's hands. He had to lead a war party and bring it back, and he had to steal an enemy's horse from inside the enemy's own camp. Generations of Crow men had walked that path, but by the time Joe Medicine Crow was born, the path was closed. The wars on the plains were over. The buffalo were gone. The people had been moved onto reservations, and the horse had vanished from the battlefield of the modern world. The 4 deeds had become impossible. Not difficult, impossible. And the old men who had earned the title were dying off one by one. Everyone understood that the line of war chiefs was ending, that Joe's grandfather's generation would be the last to wear it. Joe Medicine Crow did not set out to reopen the path. He set out, of all things, to become a scholar. He was the first member of the Crow Nation ever to go to college. When the United States entered the Second World War, he was sitting in a graduate program in anthropology in California, studying the history of his own people. Then he put down his books and enlisted. In 1943, he joined the United States Army and trained as a scout. He was assigned to the 103rd Infantry Division and sent to Europe, where he fought across France and pushed toward the German border with the rest of the Allied advance. He never stopped being a Crow. Whenever he went into combat, he painted the 2 red stripes on his arms beneath his uniform, where no one could see them, and he carried the yellow eagle feather inside his helmet, where no one could see that either. A war dominated by machine guns, artillery, and tanks the size of houses, and somewhere in the middle of it moved a man who was fighting it according to rules 4 centuries old. The first of the 4 deeds came at the Siegfried Line, the vast belt of bunkers, pillboxes, and tank traps that guarded the western edge of Germany. His commanding officer needed explosives carried forward through the open, under fire. He gave Joe Medicine Crow 7 men. Joe led them out across a field swept by German artillery, got them to the explosives, and brought them back. Not one of them was lost. He had led a war party. The third deed, done, though he wasn't counting. The next 2 came together in a single moment in a German village. He had become separated from his unit while the Americans were clearing the town. He came around the corner of a building at the exact instant a young German soldier came around it from the other side, and the 2 men collided so hard their helmets cracked together and both of them went down. Joe was faster getting up. He wrenched the rifle out of the German's hands and threw his own weapon to the ground. He had a choice now. He had the man disarmed. The simple thing, the safe thing, the thing the modern war demanded, was to pick up a gun and end it. But the old way did not ask a warrior to kill a disarmed enemy. It asked him to touch a living one, to close the last few feet and live. So Joe Medicine Crow fought him with his hands. They grappled across the ground. The German nearly turned the tables once, and then Joe got his hands around the man's throat and began to squeeze the life out of him. And the German soldier, feeling death arrive, cried out a single word. "Mama." Joe Medicine Crow let go. He took the young German prisoner, and he kept the man's rifle. In that one encounter, by choosing at the last second to spare a life instead of take it, he had touched a living enemy and survived, and he had taken an enemy's weapon. 2 more of the 4 deeds, 3 of the 4 done. He still didn't know he was doing them. There was only one left, the one that had been impossible since before he was born. The one that needed a horse. And then, in the final weeks of the war, on a quiet German farm, Joe Medicine Crow looked through his field glasses and saw 50 thoroughbreds in a corral, and senior SS officers asleep in the house beyond them. The corral, the rope, the colt, the bareback ride, the war cry, the stampede pouring out into the dark, the officers in their underwear firing into the night, and the young scout riding away at the center of it all, singing a crow song of praise. The 4th deed done. When the war ended, Joe Medicine Crow came home to Montana, and the people gathered the way they always had to hear a returning warrior tell what he had seen. He told them about the 7 men he had led through the artillery at the Siegfried Line. He told them about the German boy he had choked and then let go. He told them about the night he stole 50 horses from the SS and sang as he rode away. And as he talked, the old men grew very quiet, because they were counting. A war party, led and brought home. A living enemy touched and spared. An enemy's weapon taken by hand. An enemy's horse, 50 of them, stolen from inside the enemy's camp. 4 deeds, the exact 4. Done by a graduate student from Lodgegrass, by accident, in a foreign war, against an enemy his ancestors had never heard of. Joe Medicine Crow had not realized what he had done until the elders told him. They named him a war chief of the Crow Nation, the last one they would ever name. The last war chief of the Crow. The last war chief of the Plains Indians. A line that reached back centuries ended, quietly, in a man who had spent the war with 2 red stripes hidden under his sleeve. He did not disappear back into ordinary life. He became the keeper of his people's memory, the Crow Nation's historian, the man entrusted with the stories. He finished his education and wrote nearly a dozen books. For the rest of his long life, he lectured on the Battle of the Little Bighorn, repeating the eyewitness account he had heard as a boy from White Man Runs Him, which made him the last living link to a man who had actually watched that battle happen. France made him a Knight of its Legion of Honor for what he had done in 1945. And in 2009, in the White House, President Barack Obama lifted the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest honor a civilian can receive in the United States, and placed it around the neck of the old war chief. Joe Medicine Crow answered the way a war chief answers. He sang a crow song, and he danced. He died on April 3, 2016, at the age of 102, and he was buried with full military honors. With him, the title that had passed from warrior to warrior across the centuries, War Chief of the Plains Indians, came to its end. There would be no one after him. He never meant to become a war chief. He went to war a graduate student with 2 red stripes painted where no one could see them. And he came home the last of a line 400 years long. 50 stolen horses, a song in the dark. A German boy who cried out for his mother and lived because of it. The 4 deeds the elders swore could never be done again. Joe Medicine Crow did all 4. And then there were none after him.